an honor for me to be able to speak to audiences around the world, to share some of my experiences, some of my stories, some of the things I've learned about myself and about what it takes to achieve success in life. And it's all built around the metaphor of Everest, if you like. This is Everest, incidentally. This is the summit of Everest. It's actually a painting that was created from a photograph after we came back from that expedition back in 1982. When I came back from Everest, I was unemployed. I had no work. I'd spent 5 years organizing this expedition. We'd had to raise a lot of money. I was unemployed. And I said to my wife, Peggy, I said, what are we going to do? What am I going to do now? We've finally climbed this mountain. And she said in a very innocent statement, she said, well, you finally climbed Everest after all these years of dreaming about it. Now it's time to go one step beyond Everest and to take that story and share it with people around the world. And we formed a company called One Step Beyond Worldwide. And in fact, I just came back from New Zealand where I spoke to 2 groups, and that was my 49th country. And hopefully I'm going to India next year to make it 50. So here's Everest. It's the ultimate goal for mountaineers, and it also is that metaphor that we all aspire for in our lives. We all have those Everest goals to climb. But the real Mount Everest was first attempted, as Joe has mentioned, by this somewhat oddly clad group of British mountaineers who went to the mountain in 1924 dressed in things like Harris tweed jackets. They had scarves wrapped around their necks. Their boots were leather, no insulation. The tents had no effective way of closing the door. The zipper, of course, hadn't been invented in 1924. They'd very often wake up in the morning covered in snow. And they were carrying oxygen cylinders made of solid steel so that perhaps the negative effect of the weight of the steel was offsetting whatever positive benefit they could get from breathing that oxygen. But despite all that, on that first ever attempt back in 1924, they almost went all the way to the summit. 2 of them were last seen at 28,000 feet. They disappeared in the clouds. They were never seen again. And in fact, there is some speculation that it may have reached the summit in 1924, and that would have been 29 years before Hillary and Tenzing in 1953. One of the men who disappeared was George Lee Mallory, the man you see on the back row, second from the left, wearing the white shirt. As was mentioned, he is the man who said, because it's there, when he was asked by a journalist why he wanted to climb this mountain. But he also went on to explain with these words. He said, if you cannot understand that there is something in us which responds to the challenge of this mountain and goes out to meet it, that the struggle is the struggle of life itself, upward and forever upward, then he said, you won't see why we go. What we get from this adventure is just sheer joy, and joy is, after all, the end of life. We do not live to eat and make money. We eat and make money to be able to enjoy life. That is what life means and what life is for. George Mallory called Everest the struggle of life itself, upwards and forever upwards. And of course, it is in that struggle to climb higher, to be better, to learn more about ourselves. It's in that struggle against difficulty that we rediscover the real potential that lies hidden within us. I am the man I am today because at a very early age growing up in England, I was intensely shy and insecure. I lived in a very protected world. My dad was a senior bank executive, a very conservative profession in those days. My mum, a full-time homemaker. She was always there when I needed support. And as a result, I had no confidence. I was protected from any adversity. And I can still remember waking up, I can still remember an early family holiday. We were driving around in the car. We had got lost. And my dad's sitting in the driver's seat, I'm sitting in the passenger seat next to him, and Dad says, John, get out of the car and go and speak to that man over there. Go and speak to that man and ask him for directions how to get back to our hotel. And I was so intimidated about the idea of speaking to that one stranger that I absolutely refused to even get out of the car. It's interesting now to reflect upon the fact that I now make my living effectively speaking to strangers. I've created a strength out of what had been that limitation by acknowledging the limitation and by challenging myself against increasing difficulty on mountains all over the world. Of course, having climbed the highest mountains in the British Isles, we had to start looking further afield for more challenges. And at the age of 20, we traveled to Norway, where we'd heard about this mountainside called the Troll Wall. The trolls are the mythical giants of Norway. So this was the wall of the giants in Norwegian mythology. And it was said to be 5,000 feet absolutely vertical. In fact, there were stories of people who had hiked up the back of the mountain, had laid on their stomachs looking over the edge, had pushed huge boulders off into the void, and noticed how those rocks fell vertically through the air without touching anything until they arrived in the valley floor 1 mile below. At this point, nobody had climbed the Troll Wall. The expert climbers in Europe had come to look at it and said it was impossible. It couldn't be done. It would have to wait for another generation of climbers. But when you're 20 with something to prove, an idealism, an ambition, anything is worth a try. And we decided for the first time that we were going to try to climb the Troll Wall. And I think that was the breakthrough that we were able to bring to this challenge, is that for the first time we were willing to try to do something that the experts said was impossible. I can still remember trying to sleep the night before the climb was to start. At the bottom of this huge black mass stretching up into the stars, we could hear stones whistling down the darkness, rocks that were landing 150 feet away from the base of the cliff. And for the first time, we were realizing not only was this vertical for a mile, in fact, it was overhanging for a mile. Trying to sleep, our minds a turmoil of fear and anxiety, worrying about all the things that could go wrong up there, but knowing at the same time that unless we found the courage to start the climb the next day, knowing that unless we did that, we would never discover if we were up to that challenge. You know, when we feel fear and anxiety, as we always do, when we're moving from the comforts and predictability of the known world of our previous experience into that uncertain, unknown world of future challenge, when we feel that anxiety, it's critical we move towards it and confront it. Because when you confront fear, it recedes in front of you. When you run away from fear, I think it only grows in your mind. In fact, I believe now that fear and anxiety is just nature's way of focusing our attention on the task at hand.